All right, guys. So I was going to record my typical update video where I give you guys the latest out of Israel and Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Iran, etc. But I came across this letter from a few days ago that was written by almost 100 American doctors, nurses, physicians, directly to President Biden and Kamala Harris. And this letter contains some of the most shocking testimony that I've ever heard in my entire life from a war zone. And so I figured it would be important to read through a lot of what they said in this letter. The entirety of it will be linked down below in the description because I don't think that this is going to get much coverage from the mainstream media here or much mention from our politicians here in the United States. And so I figured let's just go ahead and work our way through it and give ourselves an idea, not only in terms of what Israel has been doing in their actions over the last 11 months, but also what potentially their motivation is in Gaza, as well as potentially in Lebanon as well, as they begin their invasion and bombing campaign there. So they start off, Dear President Biden and Kamala Harris, we are 99 American physicians, surgeons, nurse practitioners, nurses, and midwives who have volunteered in the Gaza Strip since October 7th of 2023. They say combined, we spent 254 weeks volunteering in Gaza's hospitals and clinics. We worked with various non-governmental organizations and the World Health Organization in hospitals and clinics throughout the Strip. In addition to our medical and surgical expertise, many of us have public health backgrounds as well as expertise in working in humanitarian and conflict zones, including in Ukraine during the brutal Russian invasion. Some of us are also veterans and reservists. We are a multi-faith and multi-ethnic group, and none of us support the horrors of October 7th. So they say this letter in the appendix show probative evidence that the human toll in Gaza since October is far higher than is understood in the United States. The number that continues to be floated around as of right now is still around 40,000. It's been stuck at around 40,000 for month after month after month. And so I do think it's unrealistic to believe, given the fact that we see massacre after massacre of civilians reported basically on a daily basis out of Gaza, that 40,000 number is still accurate at this point. Their estimate that they give here, they say it is likely that the death toll from this conflict is already greater than 118,908, which, as they point out here, is an astonishing 5.4% of Gaza's entire population. 5.4% of the entire population. Now, this may not even, be the entire scope of the death, the destruction of what's happened in Gaza over the last 11 months. If they're estimating that 118,000 have been killed as a result of Israel's bombing, of their invasion, of their chokehold of the humanitarian supplies getting into Gaza, if that's their estimate of the death toll, think about, we're talking about 2.1 to 2.2 million total population inside of Gaza. I mean, if that's the death toll, how many other people have been displaced? How many have been traumatized? How many have been injured? How many are sick right now inside of Gaza? It's an unfathomable amount that we're talking about right here. They say our government must act immediately to prevent an even worse catastrophe than what has already befallen the people of Gaza and Israel. A ceasefire must be imposed on the warring parties by withholding military support for Israel and supporting an international arms embargo on Israel and all Palestinian armed groups. We believe our government is obligated to do this both under American law and international humanitarian law. We also believe it is the right thing to do. And they are 100% correct about both of these things. I mean, morally, you shouldn't even really need to say it at this point. Obviously, we should have cut off weapons to Israel a long time ago. But legally, this is also the case. I just covered a story recently on my channel of Antony Blinken, Biden's Secretary of State, and how he had multiple reports from his own agencies definitively showing him that Israel was intentionally withholding humanitarian aid from the Gaza Strip, thereby making it illegal for us to continue to give them military assistance, right? He knew about those reports. He then went to Congress and he lied about it so that we could continue funneling them billions and billions of dollars, right? So we know for a fact that not only does the U.S. government know about these things, but they're actively lying to Congress and to the American people to justify the continued sending of weapons to Israel throughout all of this. So yes, it is a violation of international law. It's also a violation of U.S. law. So, in terms of how do you end this? How do you get to a ceasefire? Well, a long time ago, we should have cut off the weapons to Israel. That's like step one. That's step one, right? Joe Biden has decided not to do that, not because he can't, but because he supports what Israel has been doing in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, etc., as a matter of policy. This is an active policy decision that Joe Biden has made to allow this to continue. It's not a situation where he's powerless, right? So they're 100% correct about that. And they put a quote down here from one of these doctors who's a trauma and critical care surgeon, as well as a Veterans Affairs, a VA general surgeon. He said, "I've never seen such horrific injuries on such a massive scale with so few resources. Our bombs, meaning U.S. bombs, are cutting down women and children by the thousands. Their mutilated bodies are a monument to cruelty." That is quite an intense quote there, right? From an American doctor. They say, continuing here, with only marginal exceptions, everyone in Gaza is sick, injured, or both. This includes every national aid worker, every international volunteer, and probably every Israeli hostage, every man, woman, and child. While working in Gaza, we saw widespread malnutrition in our patients and our Palestinian healthcare colleagues. Every one of us lost weight rapidly in Gaza despite having privileged access to food and having taken our own supplementary, nutrient-dense food with us. We have photographic evidence of life-threatening malnutrition in our patients, especially children, that we are eager to share with you. So even doctors who went to Gaza, who, as they point out here, have privileged access to food, to water, to nutrients, that brought their own food with them, even they started to rapidly lose weight because of this Israeli blockade of humanitarian assistance from getting into Gaza. So imagine what your average child in Gaza is going through if these American physicians are struggling even with privileged access to that kind of food. They say virtually every child under the age of 5 whom we encountered, both inside and outside the hospital, had both a cough as well as watery diarrhea. We found cases of jaundice, indicating hepatitis A infection under such conditions, in nearly every room of the hospital in which we served, and in many of our healthcare colleagues in Gaza. An astonishingly high percentage of our surgical incisions became infected from the combination of malnutrition and impossible operating conditions, as well as the lack of basic sanitation supplies, such as soap, and a lack of surgical supplies and medications, including antibiotics. We have another quote down here that they put. This is a pediatric nurse practitioner who said, "Every day I saw babies die. They had been born healthy. Their mothers were so malnourished that they could not breastfeed, and we lacked formula or clean water to feed them, so they starved." We're talking about babies here, guys. Babies. This isn't some accidental thing that's an inevitable part of warfare. It's not, because this is happening on a historic scale. A historic scale in terms of the modern history of warfare, right? None of this is normal. None of this is acceptable. None of this was inevitable. All of this was preventable. It was all preventable. We knew that this was exactly what Israel was going to do immediately after October 7th. How do I know that? Because they said it. Because they started this genocide by saying, we're going to cut off the food, the fuel, the water, the electricity. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. They proceeded to relentlessly and repeatedly target and kill aid workers, right? We knew exactly what they were going to do going into this, and they did exactly as they said they were going to do. All of this was preventable. All of this was predictable. They continue. They say, "We urge you to realize that epidemics are raging in Gaza. Israel's continued, repeated displacement of the malnourished and sick population of Gaza, half of whom are children, to areas without running water or even toilets available is absolutely shocking. It was and remains guaranteed to result in widespread death from viral and bacterial diarrheal diseases and pneumonias, particularly in children under the age of 5. And I feel like I remember showing you guys that list, right? Sometimes we get updated names and details of those who have died inside of Gaza. And you would have to go through like 14 pages, 14 or so pages of the total death tale ranked by age inside of Gaza just to get to like 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. The amount of infants, of literal babies that have died in Gaza is just unimaginable. But we continue to allow it to happen. They continue here. They say, indeed, even the dreaded polio virus has reemerged in Gaza due to a combination of systemic destruction of the sanitation infrastructure, widespread malnutrition, weakening immune systems, and young children having missed routine vaccinations for nearly an entire year. We worry that unknown thousands have already died from the lethal combination of malnutrition and disease, and that tens of thousands more will die in the coming months, especially with the onset of the winter rains in Gaza. Most of them will be young children. Most of them will be young children. Keeping in mind that Netanyahu has made it clear that he is not even remotely interested. He's not even remotely interested in engaging in ceasefire talks with Hamas or with Hezbollah for the immediate foreseeable future, right? There was sort of this tap dance that both the U.S. government and the Israeli government were playing there for a while, where they pretended like they were in favor of a ceasefire and Hamas was the actual blockade. I mean, pretty quickly, that became apparently bullshit, right? I think to anybody who's been paying attention, it's very clear at this point that Netanyahu does not want and has not wanted a ceasefire throughout the entirety of the post-October 7th reality, right? So he has been obfuscating, he has been blocking the potential for a ceasefire. And so this is slated to go on for as long as Netanyahu wants it to go on. And not only is it going to continue going on, but on the trajectory that we are on right now, it's going to get worse, right? Israel seems to be looking to do to Lebanon what they've been doing to Gaza. I see the same exact talking points from the Israeli government now happening in Lebanon, right? Saying Hamas is in these hospitals, Hamas is in the ambulances, Hamas is in the mosques, they're in the churches, right? We saw that in Gaza. Now it's Hezbollah is in the hospitals, Hezbollah is in the ambulances, Hezbollah is in the mosques, they're in the churches, they're in the residential buildings, they're everywhere, right? Every civilian in Lebanon apparently has a ballistic missile stored in their garage, right? The same exact talking points being used now in Lebanon. With the intensity of the bombing campaign that we've seen so far, I wouldn't be surprised if we end up with some of the same results in Lebanon that we've seen in Gaza over the last 11 months, which is, I mean, it's hard to imagine that that's where we're at, but that's where we're at. Unless the Joe Biden administration, unless Kamala Harris, Donald Trump miraculously has a change of heart, unless somebody is willing to put Israel in check, unless somebody is willing to use the leverage that the United States government has over Israel to force them into a position to accept a ceasefire, to end this. But as of right now, that candidate, right, that person does not exist in the U.S. government. It's not Joe Biden. It's not Kamala Harris. It's certainly not Trump. And so this is just slated to continue on and on and on for the foreseeable future. They continue down here with another quote. This is an orthopedic and hand surgeon who said, "Gaza was the first time I held a baby's brains in my hand. The first of many. They say children are universally considered innocents in armed conflict. However, every single signatory, we got 99 of them on this letter, every single signatory saw children in Gaza who suffered violence that must, and they have this in italics here, must have been deliberately directed at them. Specifically, every one of us who worked in an emergency, intensive care, or surgical setting treated preteen children who were shot in the head or the chest on a regular or even daily basis. It is impossible that such widespread shooting of young children throughout Gaza sustained over the course of an entire year is accidental or unknown to the highest Israeli civilian and military authorities. On a daily basis, you are seeing children come in, preteens, children, who are coming in with bullet wounds to the head or the chest. How do you explain that, right? From an Israeli narrative perspective, where they say, well, Hamas was in this apartment building, Hamas was in this hospital, we had no choice but to bomb it. How do you explain children showing up to hospitals every day with bullet wounds to the head and to the chest. Was a Hamas militant hiding behind them, firing over their shoulder in all of these instances? No, of course not. This is murder that we're describing here. This is the IDF, the Israeli military, murdering innocent children on a daily basis. That's what we're discussing here. Keeping in mind also the narrative post-October 7th, right? Much of it was never actually shown to be true with, evidence that could actually be fact-checked and backed up, right? With the sexual abuse and with the beheaded babies and every other narrative that we heard after October 7th. But think about the intensity of the media narrative here in the United States from both our media and our politicians at what Hamas did on October 7th, where they definitely did commit war crimes, but the narrative was what Hamas did on October 7th was so atrocious, it was so savage, it was so barbaric that Israel has every right to do whatever they want to Gaza. That was basically the narrative, right? But then when Israel goes into Gaza and they start sniping children in the head and the chest, right? When they destroy farmland, water infrastructure, schools, mosques, churches, refugee camps, UN shelters, everything under the sun, when they do that, then that's self-defense. That's self-defense. Really. Really. Not to mention the torture, the abductions that we've seen from Gaza by the IDF. I mean, anything that you want to allege, right, real or not real, that Hamas was potentially responsible for, what we've seen in Gaza has been 10 times, 100 times worse. And yet, when Israel does it, that's self-defense, right? That's justifiable. Explain to me how any of this makes any sense. Children, fucking kids, showing up to the hospital with bullet wounds to the head and the chest. There's no way to explain this, guys. There's no way to explain this. It's fucking murder. That's what it is. They continue. They say, we all observed emergency departments overwhelmed by patients seeking treatment for chronic medical conditions such as renal failure, hypertension, and diabetes, right? So you also have not only the aspect of people who are being bombed, people who are being directly starved, who are showing up to hospitals, but you also have people who have sort of run-of-the-mill illnesses, right? Maybe you have some issue with your kidneys, you have some issue with diabetes, or whatever the case may be. In a normal situation, you would be okay, right? This would be a manageable thing, right? If the healthcare system was functional. But now you have all of these people who have all of these issues who can't get access to the medication that they need. And so you have people who are dying needless deaths, not only from the bombing, but because of the Israeli blockade of medicine from getting into Gaza. They say, aside from the trauma patients, most ICU beds were occupied by patients with type 1 diabetes who no longer had access to insulin. The lack of medication availability, the widespread loss of electricity and refrigeration, and inconsistent access to food made managing this disease impossible. They say Israel has destroyed more than half of Gaza's healthcare resources and has killed nearly 1,000 Palestinian healthcare workers. More than 1 out of every 20 healthcare workers that exist inside of Gaza. At the same time, healthcare needs have increased massively from the lethal combination of military violence, malnutrition, disease, and displacement. So you have an increased need for healthcare at the same time that Israel is obliterating the healthcare system and restricting medical supplies from getting into Gaza. The worst possible combination that you could ask for. They say the hospitals where we worked were starved from basic supplies from surgical material to soap. They were regularly cut off from the electricity and internet access, denied clean water, and operated at 4 to 7 times their bed capacity. Every hospital was overwhelmed beyond the breaking point by displaced persons seeking safety, by the constant stream of sick and malnourished patients seeking care, and by the huge influx of seriously wounded patients who typically arrived in mass casualty events. They say these observations and the publicly available material detailed in the appendix of this letter lead us to believe that the death toll from the conflict is many times higher than what is reported by the Gaza Ministry of Health. We also believe that this is probative evidence of widespread violations of American laws governing the use of American weapons abroad and of international humanitarian law. We cannot forget scenes of unbearable cruelty directed at women and children that our government is a direct participant in. And again, they are 100% correct. They continue, though. They say, we quickly learned that our Palestinian healthcare colleagues were amongst the most traumatized people in Gaza and perhaps the entire world. They say all of them were acutely aware that their work as healthcare providers had marked them as targets for Israel. Targets for Israel. This makes a mockery of the protected status that hospitals and healthcare providers are granted under the oldest and most widely accepted provisions of international law. So in Gaza, right, if you have a press vest on, if you have a, some sort of healthcare uniform on, normally, even in warfare, that would give you like an elevated protective layer where the attacking government, the attacking military would be potentially less likely to directly try to kill you, right? It's supposed to be a barrier. But with Israel's invasion of Gaza, it's been the exact opposite of that. They have been disproportionately attacked. Having a journalist, press vest on, having healthcare uniforms on, makes you a target of Israel. A target. And this has been one of, if not the single deadliest modern conflicts when it comes to the deaths of both journalists and of aid workers and of healthcare workers, right? It's making them targets. What does that tell you about the rules of engagement for the Israeli military in Gaza? They say we met healthcare personnel in Gaza who worked at hospitals that had been raided and destroyed by Israel. Many of our colleagues of ours were taken by Israel during the attacks. They all told us slightly different versions of the same story. In captivity, they were barely fed, continuously physically and psychologically abused, and finally dumped naked on the side of the road. Many told us they were subjected to mock executions and other forms of mistreatment and torture. Far too many of our healthcare colleagues were simply waiting to die. So you not only have healthcare workers being directly attacked, killed inside of Gaza, you not only have the IDF attacking, healthcare facilities themselves, invading, destroying hospitals like what we saw with Al-Shifa, for example, but you have some of them also being kidnapped from Gaza. The IDF has been kidnapping healthcare workers from Gaza, bringing them back to Israeli detention facilities and torturing them, doing mock executions. They bring them to these facilities, they malnourish them, they subject them to all sorts of different psychological and physical abuses and forms of torture. And then, if they're lucky enough to escape, if they're lucky enough to be allowed to leave, they just dump them on the side of the road naked. I remember covering this story a long time ago of similar reports of people who have been taken as detainees of the IDF. And they reported the same thing, that they were basically taken in, tortured, and then dumped on the side of the road in Gaza and expected to just walk naked through the rubble to try to figure out where the fuck they are, what they're supposed to do. I mean, it's as demented as you could possibly imagine. Far too many of our healthcare workers told us they were simply waiting to die. They say the 99 signatories of this letter spent a combined, 254 weeks inside of Gaza's largest hospitals and clinics. We wish to be absolutely clear. Not once did any of us see any type of Palestinian militant activity in any of Gaza's hospitals or other facilities. They say we urge you to see that Israel has systematically and deliberately devastated Gaza's entire healthcare system and that Israel has targeted our colleagues in Gaza for torture, disappearance, and murder. So, incredibly important line here. 99 American healthcare workers who have gone to Gaza for an extensive period of time. Not one of them did they ever see any sort of Hamas or otherwise militant activity inside the healthcare facilities where they were working. So this is direct testimony, not from Palestinians, right? Because I know our sort of racist, Islamophobic, anti-Arab media and politicians, they won't even take the word of Palestinians, obviously. But these are Americans who went to Gaza. They worked there. And they are completely debunking the main justification that Israel has used to attack the majority of Gaza's healthcare resources. They're saying, we never once, none of us, out of 100, did any of us see any sort of militant activity inside of these healthcare facilities. That is the justification that Israel has been using to destroy the Gaza healthcare system. While Hamas is using it as a forward operating base, they are using it to conduct military activities. This is a Hamas command and control center underneath Al-Shifa Hospital. Fucking bullshit. Bullshit. They're lying. That's what they're doing. They are lying in service of the destruction of the healthcare system of Gaza. They are lying in service of the destruction of the population of Gaza. That's what they're doing. And it's as clear as day. It's as clear as day. Now, they continue down here, finishing off with sort of their last message in this. They say President Biden and Vice President Harris, any solution to this problem must begin with an immediate and permanent ceasefire. We appreciate that you are working on a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. They're not. But you have overlooked an obvious fact. The United States can impose a ceasefire on the warring parties by simply stopping arms shipments to Israel and announcing that we will participate in an international arms embargo on both Israel and all Palestinian armed groups. We stress that many others have repeatedly told you over the past year, American law is perfectly clear on this matter. Continuing to arm Israel is illegal. They are 100% correct. Again, on the legality of the United States continuing to fund and to arm Israel, this is something that at the highest levels of the Biden administration, they are acutely aware of, and they are lying to the American people in service of continuing to send weapons to Israel. They know that these are illegal weapon shipments. They all know this, right? This is no mystery. This is no secret. This letter is not even necessarily revealing any new information to the Biden administration. But it's noteworthy because they feel the need to write this kind of a letter directly to Biden and to Kamala, because they have not been getting the attention that this kind of a story, these kinds of testimonies are deserving of. They're being ignored. They're being silenced. They're being shut out from any sort of conversation because the conversation is stuck around how is Israel going to escalate this fucking war to bomb Iranian nuclear sites and oil facilities. That's where the mainstream media conversation is right now. How is Israel going to respond from this drastic escalation from Iran? That's the kind of conversation they're having right now. They're not having conversations about how children are being shot in the head and the chest and starved to death inside of Gaza at a mass historic scale. They're not having that conversation. So these doctors, these nurses, 99 of them, who have been over to Gaza, spent a significant amount of time there. They're writing this letter, directly addressing it to Biden and to Kamala Harris, simply, with a pretty basic demand here. Follow U.S. law. Follow international law. This whole rules-based international order that you guys have set up, follow it. Follow it yourselves. Stick to the principles that you pretend like you believe in, right? That's the demand that they're making here. It's not a radical demand. It's not a crazy demand. It's not a politically inconvenient demand. In fact, this is something that's supported by a vast majority of the American people. So it is the morally correct thing to do. It's the legally correct thing to do. And it is the politically correct thing to do. There is no excuse at this point. None whatsoever. None whatsoever. And by the way, if this does have significant political consequences for Kamala Harris trying to, run for the 2024 election, she has nobody to blame but herself. Nobody to blame but herself. She's choosing to go perfectly in line with Joe Biden's policy in regards to Israel. And it's fucking humiliating. I mean, on top of everything else, on top of the moral angle of it, the political angle of it, is this not just humiliating that you are letting Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, dog walk you in front of the entire world? Everybody knows the dynamics of what's been going on here. The U.S. doesn't use any leverage over Israel. We finger wag at them maybe behind the scenes and then also shovel them a couple more $1 billion in aid to continue to do exactly what they're doing. Everybody knows the game that's being played right now. It's not a secret. It's not a mystery. And this is just, a perfect encapsulation of everything that I've been covering on this channel for the last 11 months straight. It's a perfect encapsulation of it. So I guess it's up to Biden at this point. I don't know. I mean, it's incredibly bleak because, I wish I could tell you guys, just wait till November and then we'll have an election and somebody else will come in and change this dynamic. No. I mean, we have Biden in power right now, and the two hypotheticals for who could be the next president is Kamala and it's Trump, right? And neither of them has shown even remote interest in breaking away from this current dynamic. I mean, this is one of the greatest atrocities in modern history, and our government, the U.S. government, is fully complicit in it.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying